Good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Donnelly. I work at the Digital Curation Centre at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And first of all, I should apologise for being only a disembodied voice this morning, as opposed to being present in Cork as I had planned and expected to be. Unfortunately, I've got a family situation that I have to stay here and take care of. So I'll be giving a couple of presentations today and tomorrow. The first of which is an overview of open science and open data in Horizon 2020. Obviously this is pre-recorded, so opportunities for questions will be limited, but if you do have questions, please feel free. Obviously the slides will be made available after the event, and indeed my contact details are on the last slide, so feel free to drop me an email if there's anything that I can clarify after the event. So this is me. It's always nice to put a face to a name. What I'll talk about over the next 20 minutes or so is I'll give a quick précis of the open access and open data agendas. I'll talk about open access in FP7, which is the previous European Commission Framework Programme, and the now mandatory open access requirement in Horizon 2020. Then I'll talk about the data management pilot in Horizon 2020, and I'll end with a couple of slides about the Foster project, which is a European infrastructure project that I work on, and indeed which is sponsoring this series of events. So open access and open data are two related agendas. Open access usually refers to publications, and open data, as you might expect, refers to the data which underpins them. Open access is part of a broader trend in research, which could be called open science, open research, science 2.0. There are various terms for it. But the perspective of the European Commission as a funder of academic research is that they see a real economic benefit to open access. Lowering the financial barriers to accessing the products of research helps smaller businesses and non-governmental organisations that maybe can't afford subscriptions to what can often be expensive academic journals. Lowering the barriers to them accessing the latest research enables them to grow much far more quickly and to capitalise on the publicly funded research. Open access to publications is fairly well established now. It's certainly past the tipping point in a number of fields, especially biology, the biomedical areas, and the harder sciences. But it's been more reluctantly embraced, perhaps, by areas like the social sciences and the humanities. And there are various reasons for that, which I'll maybe go into a little bit over the course of this presentation. In addition to immediate open access for publications, some academic disciplines have now committed to sharing data, the data which it acts as the evidence for those research findings, and those disciplines are now reaping benefits. It's been found that the research process happens fastest in high energy physics, and indeed it was the high energy physics discipline which kind of gave rise to the repository culture and the community practice of immediate sharing of research results. So the European Commission ran an open access pilot in FP7, and that's now a mandatory requirement under Horizon 2020. Following the same pattern, a pilot for open data has been introduced in Horizon 2020, and the expectation and the intention is that policy will develop in the same way for open data as it has for open access. So a little bit of background about open access. It was born in the 1980s with listserv journals in the early days of the internet, but it only really took off in the 90s as the internet became established as, you know, a normal part of our working and indeed our non-working lives. And there was a boom in online journals, and for the first time there wasn't a physical version of the research journals in many cases. So consequently the costs, the production costs came down, but which lowered the physical barriers to accessing knowledge, as in you could get hold of stuff via the internet without needing to actually visit an academic library. But the costs of online journals tended to increase much more quickly than inflation, and this happened at around about the same time as the kind of financial crash, maybe a little bit before it, which led to scholars and libraries having a cost crisis of having to pick and choose which journals to subscribe to and provide access to their researchers for. So as open access to publications became normal, if not entirely ubiquitous, as I mentioned, in the humanities and social sciences areas, there can be some resistance to this. The community has turned its attention to the data which underpins the research outputs, the evidence essentially which shows the working towards research conclusions. And we're at a situation now where data has begun to be considered as a first-class research output in its own right. So the development of the open access and research data management agendas are closely linked. This timeline pulls out a couple of key moments in the development of open access and data sharing from the 80s up to almost the present day. And you'll notice that the first entry from 1987, which is an early free online peer-reviewed journal delivered via listservs rather than via the nicely formatted online journals that we're familiar with today. So we begin with open access to journals, and then immediately the next entry is about data, the third entry is about literature, the fourth entry is about data. So these changes in open access publications inform the development of the agenda of open access to data, which of course has a relationship with publications in that the data is the evidence which underpins them. So in the 80s, the first free to access online journals began to appear, and in 1991 the Bromley principles were developed, and that was about providing immediate access, free immediate access to data around global change or climate change. The term open access, those initials OA, first came to light in 2001 at an Open Society sponsored meeting in Budapest in Hungary. The OECD ministerial representatives issued a declaration on access to research data from public funding in 2004. The open access mandate for the European Research Council came into or was announced in 2006, and in 2012 the European Commission recognised research data as being as important as publications, and it announced in July of 2012 that it would experiment with open access to research data, and that's the situation that we're in just now, from 2013 onwards, or 2014 onwards, with the Horizon 2020 Open Data pilot. And I should give props to Peter Suber for his timeline of the open access movement, which I pulled some of that information from. So some of you will be very familiar with the open access pilot, which was run in FP7. So that ran from August 2008 until the end of FP7 in 2013. And what that required was, it was a pilot which only covered a certain chunk of the framework program. So it wasn't an across-the-board pilot. It was concentrated in certain areas. Its rationale was its requirement was that grant recipients in certain areas should deposit peer-reviewed research articles or their final manuscripts resulting from FP7 into an online repository and make their best efforts to ensure open access to these articles. And it catered for both green and gold open access. Green open access is where you self-archive, and gold open access is where you pay something called an article processing charge. The rationale for this development was to improve and promote the dissemination of knowledge, thereby improving the efficiency of scientific discovery and maximising return on investment in research and development by public research funding bodies. So there's the quality and transparency and freedom of information agenda, but they also see this as being a kind of pragmatic step to increase return on investment in R&D. it covered a number of areas: climate change, obviously, energy, communication technologies, etc., etc. And the timing period, or the embargo, was 6 months from publication. So research publications could be kept locked down for 6 months after publication, except in science and society and socioeconomic sciences and the humanities, which were obviously the more arts and humanities driven. And they had a longer embargo period, which was 12 months. In terms of the place of deposit, the preference was that the institutional repository would be the best place for it to go, and failing that, an appropriate subject-based or thematic repository, or indeed the EC's own open repository for otherwise homeless papers. And the full guidelines are available at that address, although they're not particularly useful now. If you didn't know about them then, there's not much point in finding out about them now, because they've been superseded by Horizon 2020. So the Commission announced a couple of years ago that it was moving beyond open access, or widening out that conversation towards a more inclusive area of open science. What these two strands for publications and data will eventually feed into the shaping of a joint policy on responsible research and innovation. But what the situation we're at now with open access in Horizon 2020 is that all projects that receive H2020 funding are obliged to make sure that any peer-reviewed journal article they publish is openly accessible and free of charge. So that's gone from the limited coverage in the pilot to being an across-the-board mandate. The Commission's view is that the OA mandate in Horizon 2020 doesn't seek to restrict publication in any way, other than that the researcher has to make sure that the publication is made openly available and free of charge. Other than that, researchers can publish wherever they choose. So they can publish with an open access journal, which may or may not charge an article processing charge. It can publish, the researcher can publish with a subscription-based journal and deposit a copy into a repository, and embargo periods are permitted there. Or if the option is provided by the publisher, they can pay an APC to have an immediate open access copy. So that will depend on the individual circumstances of the researcher and probably the institution in which they work. So for Horizon 2020, a copy of the article must always be deposited in a repository, even if it's the gold or hybrid option which has been chosen. The Commission points to things like Sherpa Romeo, so that you can see what repositories are available to you and which open access options are available to you. And researchers could start with a list of targeted journals and prioritise, or they could use a mix and match approach based on the results of this. So while about 60% of publishers don't charge APCs, those that do, the fees can be quite expensive. The average rate is over €1,000 per article. It would be quite costly to always choose the gold route and pay lots of APCs, so it's suggested that a mixture of green and gold approaches is probably best. That will require sort of planning and communication within institutions and indeed within H2020 research consortia. This is a diagram basically showing the possible OA pathways, and at the very top of the diagram is the point that the researcher decides where to publish. This isn't the EC stipulating where to publish, but merely that it has to be open access and has to be therefore free of charge. So the main points: researcher chooses where to publish. The requirements only apply to peer-reviewed articles rather than monographs, technical reports, etc., although those can be included as desired. Green and gold open access are both possible. And it's mandatory to deposit in a repository as opposed to just putting a link to a PDF or something like that on the project website. There's no current price cap on APCs. That should be built into the budget, and it should be planned from the proposal stage. And the EC recommends how their funding should be acknowledged in publications, so you need to follow that if you are publishing material which is funded by Horizon 2020 and the Commission. So data management in Horizon 2020. I mentioned that FP7 featured an open access pilot, which is now an across-the-board requirement in FP8. Horizon 2020 includes an open research data pilot, and if I were a betting man, I would suggest that it's likely that it would become an across-the-board requirement in FP9. The goals of these developments are to lower barriers to accessing the products of publicly funded research and to strengthen the integrity and longevity of the scholarly record. So the next few slides will talk about the data management aspects of the open research data pilot. Just to recap, the benefits of sharing and making data more widely available, I've grouped these into three sort of headline areas. First and foremost, there's the transparency argument, which is that the evidence that underpins research can be made open for anyone to scrutinise, and they can attempt to replicate findings if that's a possibility in the discipline in question. And what that leads to is a more robust scholarly record. There's the efficiency argument, which is that data collection can be funded once and it can be used many times for a variety of purposes, often purposes which would be entirely unforeseen by the original collectors or creators of the data. And then there's the accessibility argument, which is that third parties can, if it's appropriate, as in the data is not sensitive, either commercially or ethically sensitive, they can access and build upon publicly funded research resources with minimal barriers to accessing them. So the H2020 Open Research Data Pilot, in common with the FP7 Open Access Pilot, covers only a subset of the research funded under that framework programme. So it covers innovation actions and research and innovation actions. It involves the creation of 3 versions of a data management plan. Slightly out of kilter with other funders who require the data management plan at the application stage, Horizon 2020 doesn't require a data management plan to be submitted as part of the application. Rather, it expects a short version of a data management plan to be created within 6 months or around 6 months after the start of the project. Then another version, a more detailed version, to be created at the mid-project review, and then a yet more detailed version at the end of project for the final review. The data management plans that they stipulate should contain information about data types, the standards used in the data sets, how the data will be shared or made available, and how it will be curated and preserved for the longer term. Of course, there are opt-out conditions where data is not suitable for sharing or reuse, and there's a lot more information via the participants portal, and the link to that is there. But I'll talk just now about some more specifics of the Open Research Data Pilot, its aim and its scope and its coverage and that kind of thing. So it aims to improve and maximise access to and reuse of the research data generated by projects. The Commission will be watching this pilot with interest, how it develops, and it will inform future EC policy on open research or Science 2.0, or whichever term is trendy at the time when they come to do that. The areas of H2020 which are covered by the Open Research Data Pilot are given there. There's quite a list, but the important thing really to mention is that you'll see the word part in there quite a lot. So all of future and emerging technologies is covered, all of research infrastructures is covered, but only part of e-infrastructures. So if you are part of a consortium in that area, you'll probably want to check to see whether your project is covered by the Open Data Pilot. Of course, if it's not covered, there's no reason not to begin to put in place the research data management plan and that kind of thing as well. So the coverage extends to about 20% of the overall H2020 budget for 2014 and 15, and it applies to 2 types of data: what you might call the primary data, which is the data, and the metadata, the descriptive information, which is needed to validate the results presented in research publications as soon as possible, and other data as specified within the deadlines laid down in the data management plan. So that's kind of secondary data, you might want to think of it. The way in which the Open Research Data Pilot is to work is that step 1, the data should be deposited ideally in a dedicated research data repository, which could be subject based or thematic. It could be institutional, or it could be some kind of centralized like a European Commission hosted data repository. The EC suggests looking at re3 data or data bib for researchers who are looking to identify the appropriate place for their data. There's an interesting disjunction between publications and data here. The common view about publications is that the institutional repository is the best place to deposit your publications. For data, a subject-based, a disciplinary or domain-based repository is generally thought to be the best place to deposit your data. Obviously these things can be linked quite nicely, but it's just a little nuance which I thought would be quite interesting. Finally, on step 1, the Commission is funding something called OpenAIR, which stands for Open Access Infrastructure for Research in Europe, which is an entry point for linking publications and data via citations and persistent identifiers. So in step 2, projects must then take measures to enable third parties to access, to mine, that's quite important, exploit, reproduce and disseminate research data, so it's open to everyone. They suggest licensing it via Creative Commons and providing information via the repository about any kind of software or tools or instruments which is necessary to validate the results, to rerun the experiments, or to understand the data. Some data will not be useful or comprehensible without access to the code which led to its creation or which processed it. So ideally that software, the tools, etc. should be made available as well where possible. Costs are covered within the Open Research Data pilot, so that should be built into project funding applications. If the EC is also providing technical and professional support via UDAT and OpenAIR, and then there's support measures such as the Foster project, which is helping to raise awareness and to point people in the right direction for getting started in this area. I mentioned before that opt-outs were possible. That there's a possibility for total or partial opt-outs if participation in if sharing data is incompatible with the obligation to protect results if they can be commercially or industrially exploited. So it's balancing the kind of idealistic view of everything should be open with the more kind of hard-nosed business approach that it shouldn't be made openly accessible if we could reasonably expect to make any money from it. If confidentiality would be breached, be that security, obviously data relating to Ebola or nuclear weapons or anything like that shouldn't be opened up. And indeed, if there's personal data, obviously personal data corresponds in many cases to living humans. Living humans have rights, and those rights have to be respected. If participation would jeopardize the achievement of the main aim of the action, that's a little bit abstract, but I guess that if this would damage the essence of the research, then there's an opt-out there. And obviously if your project will not generate any research data, then there's no obligation to share it. So just finally, a little bit about the Foster project. Foster stands for Facilitate Open Science Training for European Research. Our objectives are to support different kinds of stakeholder, be that the researchers or the people who support researchers in universities and elsewhere, to support them in adopting good open access practice, in advocating for the opening of access to publications and data, and helping researchers to understand and to comply with the different open access policies of Horizon 2020. We seek to integrate open access principles and practice in the research workflow, especially by targeting younger researchers to get this into their working methodologies at a fairly early age. We're strengthening institutional training capacity, and we're facilitating the adoption, the reinforcement and the implementation of open access policies from other European funders in line with the PASTER, in line with the EC, but in partnership with the PASTER for OA project. And that's about streamlining and synchronizing open access policies so that we don't come up against unstoppable forces meeting immovable objects situations. How this is being done is that we have been identifying existing content that could be reused in training activities, sometimes repackaging, reformatting, translating that to be used within Foster, and we're also creating and enhancing contents ourselves. We've created the Foster portal to as a kind of shop window onto the contents that we have developed and identified, and we run a help desk, we run face-to-face training with a view on training the trainer so that the knowledge and expertise and the advocacy and the good arguments can be passed on within institutions across national boundaries and within and between different disciplinary communities. So that's it from me. Again, apologies for not being able to take questions at this point, but as I said at the start, if you have questions, please feel free to email me, martin.donnelly@ed.ac.uk. You can tweet me. I'm not a very prolific tweeter. Anyway, the fact that I don't know the terminology probably speaks volumes. If you're interested in the work of the DCC, about which I said very little, our website is dcc.ac.uk, and the Foster project is fosteropenscience.eu. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of today.